The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty gravel road as Marcus Thompson drove his pickup truck toward what would either be his greatest investment or his biggest mistake. The real estate listing had been brief and uninspiring. 120-acre ranch property needs extensive work sold as is. But the price had caught his attention immediately. At 42, Marcus had spent 2 decades working cattle ranches across Montana, saving every penny he could spare. This abandoned property represented his first chance at owning his own piece of land. The truck's engine rattled as he navigated the winding dirt path that led deeper into the valley. Tall grass swayed on both sides of the neglected driveway, and broken fence posts stood like crooked sentinels marking boundaries that no longer mattered. Marcus had researched the property's history at the county courthouse the week before. The ranch had belonged to the Whitmore family for 3 generations before being abandoned nearly 5 years ago when the last heir moved to California after a family tragedy. As the main house came into view, Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The photographs from the listing hadn't captured the full extent of the deterioration. The wraparound porch sagged on one side, several windows were boarded up, and the red paint on the barn had faded to a rusty pink. Weeds grew knee-high around the foundation, and a broken windmill creaked mournfully in the gentle breeze. This place would require months of hard work before it could support even a small herd of cattle. Marcus parked near the front steps and sat for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. He had brought his toolbox, a thermos of coffee, and a notebook to make a comprehensive list of repairs needed. The bank had approved his loan based on the land value alone, but they had made it clear that any improvements would need to come from his own pocket. He stepped out of the truck and stretched, breathing in the clean mountain air. Despite the property's condition, something about this place felt right. The front door hung slightly askew on its hinges. Marcus had received the keys from the real estate agent the day before, along with a thick folder of legal documents and disclosure forms. As he fumbled with the unfamiliar keyring, he noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the barn. Probably kids using the abandoned property as a hangout spot, he reasoned. Rural properties often attracted teenagers looking for places to party away from parental supervision. The key turned with some effort, and the door swung open with a loud creak. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the boarded windows, creating geometric patterns on the dusty hardwood floors. The smell hit him immediately, a mixture of old wood, mouse droppings, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Sweet and slightly floral, like perfume that had long since gone stale. Marcus stepped inside and let his eyes adjust to the dim interior. The main room was larger than he had expected, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall and built-in bookshelves flanking it on both sides. Someone had covered most of the furniture with white sheets, giving the space an eerie, ghost-like quality. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, and his footsteps echoed hollowly on the bare floors. He pulled out his notebook and began documenting what he saw. The hardwood floors would need refinishing, but appeared structurally sound. The stone fireplace looked solid, though the chimney would need inspection. Water stains on the ceiling near the kitchen suggested roof problems. As he moved through the house, making notes and taking measurements, Marcus began to formulate a renovation timeline in his mind. The kitchen had obviously been the heart of the home at one time. A large farmhouse table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs that suggested family gatherings and community meals. The cabinets were solid oak, but would need new hardware and fresh paint. The appliances were decades old and would all need replacement. Marcus opened the refrigerator door and immediately closed it again, grimacing at the smell that wafted out. Upstairs, for bedrooms, led off a central hallway. The master bedroom had obviously belonged to adults, with a large 4-poster bed still made up with a faded quilt. The other 3 rooms were clearly children's bedrooms, frozen in time like a museum exhibit. In one room, toys were scattered across the floor as if their young owner had just stepped out to play. A dollhouse sat in one corner, its miniature furniture carefully arranged. Posters of horses and puppies covered the walls, and a small bookshelf held dozens of children's books. Marcus felt a strange sadness as he examined this room. According to the records he had reviewed, the Whitmore family had included 2 young children when they left the property. He couldn't imagine how difficult it must have been for parents to pack up their children's belongings and abandon the only home the kids had ever known. Financial hardship could force people to make heartbreaking decisions. He spent the next hour examining the house's structural elements. The foundation appeared solid, though some of the basement support beams showed signs of moisture damage. The electrical system was outdated and would need complete replacement before the house could be safely occupied. The plumbing seemed functional, but several fixtures would need repair or replacement. Overall, the house was in better condition than Marcus had feared, but the renovation would still be expensive and time-consuming. Outside, Marcus walked the perimeter of the property, noting the locations of outbuildings and equipment. The barn was larger than it had appeared from a distance, with space for at least 20 head of cattle. The roof had several holes that would need immediate attention, but the structure itself seemed sound. A smaller building had probably served as a workshop based on the tools and equipment still scattered inside. Another structure appeared to be a chicken coop, though it had been empty for years. As he explored the property, Marcus began to see its potential. The pastures had good grass despite years of neglect, and a creek ran through the northern section, providing natural water for livestock. The valley was sheltered from harsh winter winds, and the soil looked fertile. With some investment and hard work, this could become a productive ranch again. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink toward the mountains when Marcus decided to check the interior of the barn more thoroughly. He had noticed earlier that the large doors were chained shut, which seemed unusual for an abandoned property. The real estate agent had mentioned that some of the previous owner's belongings might still be stored in various outbuildings. The chain was secured with an old padlock that looked different from the others he had encountered. While most of the locks on the property were rusty and weathered, this one appeared newer. Marcus tried several keys from his ring before finding one that fit. The chain fell away with a metallic clatter that echoed in the stillness of the late afternoon. As he pulled open the heavy wooden doors, Marcus was surprised to find the barn's interior in much better condition than the outside had suggested. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, but the damage was less extensive than he had feared. Hay bales were stacked along one wall, and farm equipment sat covered with tarps. The smell of old hay and leather was pleasant and familiar. Marcus was examining a vintage tractor when he heard it, a soft sound that made him freeze in place. At first, he thought it might be wind moving through the rafters or mice scurrying in the hay. But as he stood perfectly still, listening intently, the sound came again. It was unmistakably human. Someone was crying. His heart began to beat faster as he tried to determine where the sound was coming from. The barn was large, with several stalls and storage areas that could conceal someone. Marcus called out, his voice echoing in the space. "Hello, is someone there?" The crying stopped immediately, replaced by complete silence. Marcus moved slowly toward the back of the barn, following his instincts about where the sound had originated. Behind a stack of hay bales, tucked into the corner where 2 walls met, he discovered a small, makeshift shelter. Someone had arranged several bales to create a private space and covered the opening with an old horse blanket. Personal belongings were scattered inside. A small backpack, some children's books, a stuffed animal, and a water bottle. "I'm not going to hurt you," Marcus said gently, keeping his distance from the shelter. "My name is Marcus. I just bought this ranch. Are you okay?" He waited, listening for any response, but heard only silence. The presence of children's items suggested that whoever was hiding was young and probably scared. Marcus backed away from the shelter and sat down on a nearby hay bale, making himself appear as non-threatening as possible. He had grown up with 3 younger sisters and understood that frightened children needed time and space to feel safe. "I can see that you've been staying here," he said in a calm voice. "That's okay. You're not in trouble. But I'm worried about you being out here alone." Several minutes passed before a small voice answered from behind the blanket. Are you going to make me leave? The voice was clearly that of a young girl, probably no more than 8 or 9 years old. The fear and exhaustion in her tone made Marcus's chest tighten with concern. I'm not going to make you do anything, Marcus replied. But I am wondering if there are people who are worried about you. Do your parents know where you are? The question prompted a fresh bout of crying from behind the shelter. Marcus waited patiently, allowing the girl time to compose herself. I don't have parents anymore, came the small voice. They died in a car accident 3 months ago. I was supposed to go live with my aunt, but she doesn't really want me. She said so to her friend on the phone. She thinks I can't understand because I'm just a kid, but I heard everything. Marcus felt his heart break for this child. He couldn't imagine the trauma of losing parents and then feeling unwanted by the only family she had left. What's your name, sweetheart? He asked gently. Emma, the girl replied. Emma Whitmore. The surname hit Marcus like a physical blow. This child was connected to the family that had previously owned this ranch. Emma, are you related to the people who used to live in the house here? He asked. My grandpa owned this place, Emma said, her voice growing slightly stronger. I used to come here for summers when I was little. After my parents died, I remembered this place and how happy I was here. My aunt was going to send me to a boarding school, so I ran away. I've been living here for 2 weeks. Marcus struggled to process what he was hearing. This 9-year-old girl had somehow traveled here alone and had been living in an abandoned barn for 2 weeks. The logistics alone were staggering, not to mention the danger she had been in. Emma, have you been eating? Do you have food and water? There's a store about 2 miles down the road, Emma explained. I have some money my parents left me. I walk there every few days to buy food. And there's water from the well by the house. Grandpa showed me how to work it when I was 6. The practicality of the child's survival plan was both impressive and heartbreaking. She had clearly inherited the resourcefulness that had allowed her family to work this land for generations. But a 9-year-old girl living alone in an abandoned building was a situation that couldn't continue, regardless of her capabilities. Emma, I need you to know that you're not in trouble, and I'm not angry, Marcus said carefully. But there are people who are probably very worried about you. Your aunt might not have said the right things, but I'm sure she's scared and wants you to be safe. She doesn't want me, Emma repeated stubbornly. She told her friend that having a kid would ruin her lifestyle. She only took me because the social worker said she had to. Marcus recognized the complexity of the situation. Foster care and family placement issues were far beyond his expertise, but he couldn't leave a child alone in an abandoned barn regardless of the circumstances. Emma, would you be willing to come out so we can talk face to face? I promise I won't do anything to scare you. After several long minutes, the blanket moved aside and Emma emerged from her shelter. Marcus had to fight to keep his expression neutral when he saw her. The girl was small for her age, with tangled blonde hair and clothes that were obviously too big for her. Her face was dirty, but her eyes held an intelligence and wariness that seemed far too mature for someone so young. Despite her circumstances, Emma had clearly been taking care of herself as best she could. Her clothes were worn but clean, and she moved with the quiet confidence of a child who had learned to be self-sufficient. She clutched the stuffed animal he had noticed earlier, a small brown horse with a braided mane. This is Patches, Emma said, holding up the toy. My grandpa gave him to me the last time I visited here. He told me that Patches would always remind me that this place would be my home whenever I needed one. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This child had nowhere else to go, and her connection to the land he had just purchased created an obligation he couldn't ignore. At the same time, he knew that housing a runaway child, even temporarily, could create serious legal complications. Emma, I want you to know that I understand why you came here, Marcus said. This is a special place, and I can see why your grandfather wanted you to think of it as home. But right now, there are people who are responsible for taking care of you, and they need to know that you're safe. Emma's expression became guarded again. Are you going to call the police? I think we need to call someone, Marcus said honestly. But first, I want to make sure you have something to eat and a safe place to sleep tonight. Would you be willing to come up to the house with me? I have some food in my truck, and we can figure out what to do next. Emma considered this offer carefully. Will you promise not to just ship me back to my aunt without talking to me first? Marcus was moved by the girl's attempt to negotiate for some control over her situation. I promise that we'll talk about everything before making any decisions. And I want you to know that your grandfather was right about this place being special. I can see why it feels like home to you. As they walked toward the house together, Emma began to open up about her experiences over the past 2 weeks. She had been sleeping in the barn and using the old hand pump to access well water. Her survival skills were impressive for someone so young, but Marcus could see signs of the strain she had been under. She was too thin, and exhaustion was evident in the way she moved. Emma's knowledge of the property surprised Marcus. She pointed out features and shared memories that brought the ranch's history to life. She knew where her grandfather had kept tools, which pastures had the best grass, and stories about the horses that had lived there years before. Her connection to the land was genuine and deep. As they reached the house, Marcus realized that his simple plan to renovate an abandoned ranch had suddenly become much more complicated. Emma Whitmore wasn't just a runaway child who needed help. She was the rightful heir to the emotional legacy of this place. The question was how to honor that legacy while ensuring her safety and future. The sun was setting behind the mountains as Marcus unlocked the front door and invited Emma inside the house that had once been her second home. Neither of them knew that this moment would change both of their lives forever, or that the abandoned ranch would soon become the center of a legal battle that would test everyone's understanding of what family really means. Marcus looked at Emma's small figure silhouetted in the doorway and made a decision that would alter the course of his carefully planned future. Whatever happened next, he would not abandon this child the way others had abandoned this land. Some responsibilities chose you, and he had just been chosen by both a ranch and a little girl who desperately needed someone to fight for them. The kitchen felt different with Emma sitting at the old farmhouse table, picking at the sandwich Marcus had made from supplies in his truck. Somehow, the presence of this small girl transformed the abandoned house from a renovation project into something that felt almost like a home again. Emma ate slowly, as if savoring each bite, while Marcus tried to figure out how to handle a situation he had never imagined facing. "Emma, I need to ask you something important," Marcus said, sitting across from her at the worn wooden table. "How did you get here from your aunt's house? That's got to be at least 100 miles away." Emma looked up from her sandwich, and Marcus could see her deciding whether to trust him with the truth. "I took a bus," she said finally. "I saved my allowance for weeks and looked up the bus route online at the library. I told my aunt I was going to spend the day at the park, but instead I walked to the bus station." The logistics of a 9-year-old successfully traveling across the state alone amazed and worried Marcus in equal measure. That must have been scary, traveling by yourself. It was, Emma admitted, but staying with Aunt Patricia was scarier. She drinks wine every night and cries on the phone to her friends about how her life is ruined. She never wanted kids, and she makes sure I know it every day. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest at the thought of an adult making a grieving child feel unwanted. He forced himself to remain calm. Emma needed stability right now, not another adult's emotional reaction to her situation. "What about other family members?" Marcus asked gently. "Are there other relatives who might want to take care of you?" Emma shook her head. "My parents were only children, just like me. Grandpa was my dad's father, and he died 2 years ago. Grandma died when I was really little. Aunt Patricia is my mom's sister, and she's the only family I have left." The isolation of Emma's situation struck Marcus deeply. This child had lost everyone who had ever truly loved her, and was now trapped with someone who saw her as a burden. No wonder she had run away to the one place where she had happy memories. "Tell me about your grandfather and this ranch," Marcus said, hoping to steer the conversation towards something positive. Emma's face brightened immediately. Grandpa Joe was the best person in the whole world. He taught me how to ride horses and how to tell which animals were sick just by watching them. He said I had a natural gift with animals, just like my great-grandfather did. As Emma talked, Marcus began to understand the depth of her connection to this land. Her grandfather had spent every summer teaching her about ranch life, passing down knowledge that went back generations. She knew the seasonal patterns of the wildlife, which parts of the creek ran deepest, and where the best shelter could be found during storms. Grandpa always said this ranch was meant to have kids running around, Emma continued. He told me that when I grew up, I could come back here and raise my own children on the same land where he grew up. He said the ranch was waiting for me. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility growing heavier. This child didn't just want to live here. She had been promised this place as her heritage. The legal implications were complicated, but the emotional reality was clear. Emma belonged here in a way that went beyond property ownership. As evenings settled over the ranch, Marcus realized he needed to contact the authorities about Emma's situation. A missing child report had undoubtedly been filed, and people were probably looking for her. But first, he wanted to make sure Emma felt safe and heard. Emma, I know you don't want to go back to your aunt's house, Marcus said carefully, but people are probably very worried about you right now. We need to let them know you're safe. Emma's expression became guarded again. You're going to call them, aren't you? And then they'll come get me and take me back. I'm going to make some phone calls, Marcus admitted. But I want you to understand something important. I'm not going to let anyone just drag you away without making sure you're going to be properly taken care of. That's a promise. Marcus pulled out his cell phone and discovered he had no signal. Rural areas often had poor cell coverage, and the ranch's location in the valley made communication even more challenging. He would need to drive to higher ground or into town to make the necessary calls. Emma, I need to drive to town to use my phone, Marcus explained. I want you to come with me, okay? We'll find a place to stay for the night, and tomorrow we can start figuring out how to make sure you're safe and happy. Emma hesitated. Can we come back here tomorrow? I don't want to leave Grandpa's ranch. Yes, Marcus promised. We'll come back. This place isn't going anywhere. The drive to town gave Marcus time to think about the complexity of Emma's situation. As a single man with no experience raising children, he was hardly the ideal guardian for a traumatized 9-year-old. But his own childhood experiences had taught him something important about what children needed most, someone who would listen to them and fight for their best interests. Marcus had grown up in foster care himself after his parents died in a farming accident when he was 12. He understood the feeling of being unwanted and passed around between relatives who saw him as an obligation rather than a blessing. That experience had shaped his entire life, making him determined to be self-sufficient and never dependent on anyone else's charity. At the small motel in town, Marcus got 2 adjoining rooms and helped Emma settle in for the night. The clerk at the front desk glanced curiously at the unlikely pair, but didn't ask questions. Small towns were used to people minding their own business. After Emma fell asleep, Marcus sat outside on the motel's covered walkway and called the sheriff's office. The conversation was difficult, but necessary. Yes, there was a missing person report for Emma Whitmore. Yes, her aunt was frantic with worry. No, there were no immediate plans to take Emma into state custody, but her legal guardian would need to be contacted immediately. The sheriff, a man named Tom Bradley, agreed to meet with Marcus and Emma the next morning rather than sending deputies to collect her immediately. Marcus appreciated the man's willingness to handle the situation with sensitivity rather than treating Emma like a criminal. Marcus's second call was to a lawyer he had used for the ranch purchase. The legal issues surrounding Emma's situation were complex. Even if her aunt was an unsuitable guardian, the alternatives might not be better. Foster care was often traumatic for children Emma's age, especially those who had already experienced significant losses. The lawyer explained that Emma's connection to the ranch, while emotionally significant, didn't give her any legal claim to the property. Marcus had purchased it legitimately from the estate, and Emma's aunt had no interest in contesting the sale. However, if Marcus wanted to help Emma, there might be options worth exploring. Sleep came hard for Marcus that night. He found himself thinking about the promise he had made to Emma and wondering whether he was prepared for the consequences of keeping it. Helping a runaway child was one thing, but the legal, financial, and emotional implications of becoming involved in her long-term care were staggering. The next morning, Emma was quiet during breakfast, clearly anxious about what the day would bring. Marcus tried to reassure her, but he knew that the conversation with Sheriff Bradley would determine much about Emma's immediate future. Sheriff Bradley turned out to be a man in his 50s with a kind face and a gentle manner that immediately put Emma at ease. He listened carefully as Emma explained why she had run away and what life with her aunt had been like. The sheriff asked thoughtful questions and took notes without making Emma feel like she was being interrogated. "Emma, I need you to understand that your aunt has been very worried about you," Sheriff Bradley said. "She's been calling our office every day since you disappeared. Whatever problems you two have been having, she does care about your safety." "She cares because she has to," Emma replied. "But she doesn't want me." She told her friend Jennifer that taking care of me was like having her life stolen from her. Sheriff Bradley nodded sympathetically. Sometimes adults say things when they're stressed that they don't really mean. But I can see that those words hurt you, and that's important too. The sheriff turned to Marcus. "Mr. Thompson, I appreciate you taking care of Emma and making sure she was safe. But we need to figure out what happens next. Her aunt is her legal guardian, and she has the right to have Emma returned to her custody." Marcus felt Emma tense beside him. "Sheriff, I understand the legal situation, but I'm hoping we can find a solution that puts Emma's best interests first. She has a strong connection to my ranch, and she's been through a lot of trauma recently." "What are you suggesting?" Sheriff Bradley asked. Marcus took a deep breath. He was about to make a commitment that would change his life forever. "I'd like to explore the possibility of becoming Emma's guardian myself. If her aunt is willing to transfer custody, and if it's what Emma wants, I'd like to provide her with a stable home on the ranch that meant so much to her grandfather." Emma's eyes widened with surprise and hope. Sheriff Bradley leaned back in his chair, considering the proposal. "Mr. Thompson, that's a generous offer, but guardianship is a serious legal responsibility. Do you have experience raising children?" "No," Marcus admitted honestly. "But I have experience being a child who needed someone to fight for them. I grew up in foster care, and I know what it feels like to be unwanted. Emma shouldn't have to go through that." Sheriff Bradley explained the legal process for transferring guardianship. Emma's aunt would have to consent to the arrangement, and the state would need to conduct background checks and home evaluations. The process could take several months, and there were no guarantees that it would be approved. "What happens to Emma in the meantime?" Marcus asked. "That depends on her aunt," Sheriff Bradley said. "If she's willing to consider the guardianship transfer, she might agree to let Emma stay with you temporarily while the paperwork is processed. But if she insists on immediate custody, we'll have to honor that." The drive back to the ranch was quiet. Emma stared out the window at the passing landscape, and Marcus could see her processing everything that had been discussed. The uncertainty of her situation had to be terrifying for a child who had already lost so much. "Marcus," Emma said finally, "do you really want to take care of me, or are you just being nice because you feel sorry for me?" The directness of her question caught Marcus off guard. He pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to look at Emma. "Emma, I'm not going to lie to you. I never planned on becoming a guardian to anyone. I bought that ranch because I wanted a quiet place to raise cattle and be left alone." Emma's face fell, and Marcus quickly continued. "But sometimes life gives you something you didn't know you needed. You belong on that ranch in a way that I never will. Your family built that place with their own hands, and your grandfather's dream was for you to grow up there. If I can help make that happen, then I want to try." Emma studied his face carefully, as if trying to determine whether she could trust his words. "Would I be allowed to learn about ranching? Grandpa was teaching me, but we didn't get to finish everything." "Emma, if this works out, I'll teach you everything I know about raising cattle and working the land. and I have a feeling you'll teach me things too. For the first time since Marcus had met her, Emma smiled. It was a small, tentative expression, but it transformed her entire face. Grandpa always said that the ranch chose its people, not the other way around. Maybe it chose both of us. As they drove back toward the ranch, Marcus realized that his carefully planned life of solitary independence was about to become something entirely different. The abandoned ranch he had purchased as an investment was about to become a home, and the scared little girl sitting beside him was about to become the most important responsibility he had ever undertaken. The legal battles ahead would be challenging, and there were no guarantees that Emma's aunt would agree to the guardianship transfer. But as they pulled into the familiar driveway and saw the house and barn waiting for them in the afternoon sunshine, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The possibility of belonging somewhere with someone who needed him as much as he was beginning to need her. Emma jumped out of the truck before it had completely stopped and ran toward the barn where she had been hiding just 24 hours earlier. But instead of disappearing into her makeshift shelter, she turned and waited for Marcus to join her. Together, they stood looking at the ranch that had brought them together, each knowing that their lives had been forever changed by an abandoned property and a little girl's desperate search for home. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pastures, and Marcus could almost hear Emma's grandfather's voice carried on the wind, telling them both that the ranch had indeed chosen its people, and that sometimes the most unexpected families were the ones that were meant to be. 3 weeks after Marcus first found Emma crying in the barn, he sat in a sterile conference room at the county courthouse, watching a woman he had never met make the most important decision of a little girl's life. Patricia Henley, Emma's aunt, was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her early 30s, with perfectly styled hair and expensive clothes that seemed out of place in the rural courthouse setting. Emma sat quietly beside Marcus, her small hands folded in her lap, trying to appear invisible. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of legal consultations, background checks, and supervised visits that had allowed Emma to stay at the ranch temporarily while the adults sorted out her future. "I want to be clear about my position," Patricia said to the lawyer mediating the discussion. "I never asked to become a guardian. Emma's parents named me in their will because I'm her only living relative, not because I'm qualified to raise a child." Marcus watched Emma flinch at her aunt's words. Even though this conversation was moving toward what they all hoped would be a positive outcome, the blunt reminder of her aunt's reluctance still stung. "Ms. Henley," the lawyer said carefully, "we understand that guardianship was thrust upon you under difficult circumstances. But we need to make sure that transferring custody is truly in Emma's best interests and that you're making this decision freely." Patricia glanced at Emma, and for a moment, Marcus saw something that might have been regret cross her face. "Look, I'm not a monster. I know Emma needs stability and love, but I can't provide that for her. My lifestyle isn't compatible with raising a child, and I don't want to end up resenting her for changes I'd have to make." The honesty was brutal, but appreciated. Marcus had spent hours talking with Patricia over the past weeks, and he had come to understand that her reluctance wasn't born of cruelty, but of self-awareness. She genuinely believed that Emma would be better off with someone else. "Mr. Thompson," the lawyer continued, "you've undergone extensive background checks and interviews with child services. Your references all speak highly of your character, and the financial evaluation shows you're capable of providing for Emma's needs. But I want to make sure you understand the full scope of what you're taking on." Marcus nodded. The past 3 weeks had been an intensive education in everything from child psychology to educational requirements. He had read books, attended classes, and consulted with everyone from pediatricians to child therapists. The learning curve was steep, but his determination had only grown stronger. "I understand that raising Emma will be the most important job I'll ever have," Marcus said. "I've never been a parent before, but I'm committed to learning whatever I need to know to give her the home she deserves." Emma looked up at him, and Marcus saw trust in her eyes that he was determined never to betray. Over the past weeks, They had developed routines and discovered compatibility that surprised everyone, including themselves. Emma was intelligent, curious, and resilient in ways that constantly amazed Marcus. And her knowledge of ranch life was already proving invaluable as they worked together to restore the property. The lawyer reviewed the legal documents one final time. If everyone is in agreement, Ms. Henley will relinquish her guardianship rights, and Mr. Thompson will become Emma's legal guardian. Emma, do you understand what this means? Emma straightened in her chair. It means Marcus will be responsible for taking care of me, and I'll get to live on Grandpa's ranch permanently. That's right, the lawyer confirmed. It also means that Mr. Thompson will make all the important decisions about your health, education, and welfare. Are you comfortable with that arrangement? Yes, Emma said without hesitation. Marcus listens to me, and he's teaching me how to fix things around the ranch. He promised that I'll always have a say in decisions that affect me. The formal signing took only a few minutes, but the emotional weight of the moment filled the room. Marcus was officially becoming Emma's guardian, responsible for her well-being until she reached adulthood. Emma was gaining not just a new home, but a chance to grow up in the place that connected her to her family's history. Patricia stood to leave, pausing beside Emma's chair. Emma, I want you to know that this isn't because I don't care about you. I just can't be the person you need me to be. Marcus can. Emma looked up at her aunt with surprising maturity. I know, Aunt Patricia. I hope you'll come visit the ranch sometime. Grandpa would want you to see it when it's beautiful again. The offer was generous and unexpected, and Marcus saw Patricia struggle with emotion for the first time since he had met her. Maybe I will, she said quietly, then gathered her purse and left without looking back. The drive home was quiet but comfortable. Emma seemed thoughtful rather than troubled, processing the magnitude of what had just occurred. As they turned into the familiar driveway, Marcus felt a sense of rightness that had been building for weeks. This place was becoming exactly what it was meant to be, a home. The ranch had been transformed dramatically in the weeks since Emma had moved in properly. With her help and guidance, Marcus had prioritized repairs that would make the house comfortable and safe. The roof was patched, the electrical system was updated, and the kitchen was functional again. Emma had insisted on helping with every project, demonstrating a work ethic and practical knowledge that impressed everyone who met her. Marcus, Emma said as they pulled up to the house, can we work on the barn this afternoon? I want to clean out the stall where Grandpa kept Buttercup. I've been thinking it's almost time to get our first horse. Marcus smiled at Emma's use of the word our. Over the past weeks, she had gradually stopped talking about your ranch and started referring to it as belonging to both of them. The shift was subtle but significant, indicating that she was beginning to feel genuinely secure in her new home. I think that's an excellent idea, Marcus agreed. But first, we need to talk about something important. Now that the guardianship is official, we need to discuss school. The local elementary school is expecting you to enroll for the fall semester. Emma's excitement dimmed slightly. Do I have to go to regular school? Grandpa was teaching me so much here on the ranch. I feel like I learned more working with animals and fixing things than I ever did sitting in a classroom. Marcus had anticipated this conversation. Emma's education was one of his primary responsibilities as her guardian, but he also wanted to honor her learning style and interests. You do need formal education, Emma, but that doesn't mean we can't supplement it with ranch learning. In fact, I've been thinking about some options that might work well for both of us. Over dinner that evening, Marcus outlined his research into educational alternatives. The local school district offered a rural education program that allowed students to spend part of their day in traditional classes and part of their day in practical, hands-on learning experiences. For a child with Emma's interests and background, it could be an ideal solution. The program includes agricultural education, animal husbandry, and even basic veterinary training, Marcus explained. You'd still take regular classes like math, reading, and science, but you'd also get credit for the ranch work you're already doing. Emma's eyes lit up with interest. Would I be able to keep working here with you every day? Absolutely. In fact, Your experience here would be part of your education. And I've been thinking about something else too. Marcus paused, wanting to present his next idea carefully. What would you think about us raising cattle together? Not just as a way to make money, but as a way to honor your grandfather's legacy and build something for your future. Emma set down her fork and stared at Marcus. You mean like a real cattle ranch? Like Grandpa always wanted. Exactly like that. We'd start small, maybe with a dozen head, and build up gradually as we learn and as the ranch improvements are completed. By the time you're old enough to make your own decisions about the future, you'll have the knowledge and experience to run this place yourself, if that's what you want. The idea had been forming in Marcus's mind for weeks. His original plan to live quietly on the ranch had evolved into something much more ambitious and meaningful. With Emma's natural affinity for animals and her connection to the land, they could create something truly special together. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of Marcus's proposal. Would you teach me everything? Even the hard parts like when animals get sick or when there's not enough money. Especially the hard parts, Marcus assured her. Your grandfather didn't shield you from reality, and I won't either. Running a ranch means dealing with difficult decisions and challenging circumstances. But it also means being self-sufficient and building something that lasts. That evening, as Emma worked on homework at the kitchen table and Marcus reviewed cattle auction catalogs, they began to feel like a real family. The house that had been empty for so long was filled with the comfortable sounds of daily life. Emma's pencil scratching on paper, the radio playing softly in the background, and the tick of the old clock on the mantel. Marcus found himself thinking about the transformation that had occurred in just a few weeks. The abandoned ranch was becoming productive again, the house was becoming a home, and he was becoming something he had never expected to be, a father figure to a child who needed him as much as he was discovering he needed her. The first cattle arrived on a crisp morning in late August, just a week before Emma was scheduled to start school. Marcus had chosen the animals carefully, selecting gentle, healthy stock that would be appropriate for a beginning rancher to work with. Emma was beside herself with excitement, racing from the house to the barn to make sure everything was perfect for their arrival. Remember what we practiced? Marcus told Emma as the livestock trailer pulled up to the barn. Move slowly around the cattle. Let them get used to the smell and sound of the ranch. And always respect the fact that they're much bigger than you are. Emma nodded seriously. Over the past weeks, Marcus had been teaching her the fundamentals of animal handling, emphasizing safety and patience above everything else. She had proven to be a natural, with an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that impressed experienced ranchers who visited the property. As they unloaded the cattle and guided them into the pasture, Marcus felt a sense of completion that went beyond the satisfaction of a successful business venture. This was what the ranch had been waiting for, the return of the purpose it had been built to serve, and the presence of people who understood its value beyond mere real estate. Emma stood at the fence watching the cattle explore their new home, her face glowing with happiness and pride. Grandpa would love this, she said softly. He always said that this place was meant to have animals on it, and that the land got sad when it was empty. I think your grandpa would be very proud of you, Marcus replied. You're carrying on his work and making sure his ranch has the future he always dreamed about. The school year started with some adjustment challenges, but the rural education program proved to be exactly what Emma needed. She excelled in her traditional subjects while gaining practical experience that reinforced everything Marcus was teaching her at home. Her teachers were impressed by her maturity and work ethic, qualities that had been shaped by her experiences and losses, but also by the stability she was finding in her new life. As autumn progressed, Marcus and Emma fell into routines that balanced education, ranch work, and the simple pleasures of family life. Emma proved to be an excellent student and an even better ranch hand, taking on increasing responsibilities as her knowledge and confidence grew. The legal aspects of their relationship were settled, but the emotional bonds were still developing. Marcus was careful not to try to replace Emma's parents, but instead to create something new that honored her past while building toward her future. They talked regularly about her memories of her parents and grandfather, keeping those relationships alive through stories and traditions. One evening in late October, as they sat on the front porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Emma made an observation that surprised Marcus with its insight. "Marcus," she said, "I think maybe everything had to happen the way it did for us to end up here together. I mean, it's terrible that my parents died, and I wish that never happened. But if they hadn't, I wouldn't have needed a new home, and you wouldn't have found me in the barn." Marcus considered her words carefully. "Do you really think it was meant to happen this way? Grandpa always said that the ranch had its own kind of magic, and that it brought together the people who were supposed to be here. Maybe that's what happened with us." As winter approached, Marcus and Emma began planning for the future with increasing confidence. The cattle were thriving, the ranch improvements were progressing steadily, and Emma's education was exceeding everyone's expectations. More importantly, they had become a family in all the ways that mattered. The abandoned ranch that Marcus had purchased as an investment had become something infinitely more valuable. A home where a grieving child could heal and grow, where a solitary man could discover the joy of parenting, and where a family legacy could continue into the future. On Christmas morning, as Emma opened presents under a tree they had cut from their own land and decorated with ornaments that combined her family traditions with new ones they were creating together, Marcus reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought them to this moment. The little girl who had been crying in the barn 6 months earlier was now a confident, happy child who was learning to be a rancher while excelling in school. The man who had wanted nothing more than solitude had discovered that the most rewarding work of his life was raising a child who challenged and inspired him every day. Emma looked up from a book about horse training that Marcus had given her and smiled. "Next year, can we get that horse we talked about? I've been reading about quarter horses, and I think one would be perfect for our ranch." "Next year," Marcus agreed, "we can get a horse. And maybe some sheep too, if you're interested in learning about different kinds of livestock." Emma's eyes sparkled with anticipation. Grandpa would say that we're making the ranch come alive again. Marcus looked out the window at the land that had brought them together, the pastures where their cattle were spending a comfortable winter, and the barn where a scared little girl had once hidden from a world that seemed to have no place for her. "Yes," he said, pulling Emma close for a hug. "I think your grandpa would say we're doing exactly what the ranch was waiting for." As snow began to fall softly outside their warm kitchen, Marcus and Emma made plans for the spring planting, discussed Emma's ideas for expanding their livestock operation, and enjoyed the simple miracle of being a family. The abandoned ranch had found its purpose again, and two people who had been lost had found their way home to each other and to the land that had been waiting for them all along.